Hello, and welcome to another edition of Sree's Sunday New York Times Read-Along. All our guests are special. Some guests are more special than others. Today, we're joined by Clyde Haberman, Pulitzer Prize winning former columnist and editorial writer at the New York Times, with 13 years as a foreign correspondent based in Tokyo, Rome, and Jerusalem. That does not count his time as a copy boy or bureau chief for New York City and columnist, the NYC column, etc. We'll talk about all of that when he joins us. We are live on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube. My name is Neil Parekh, and I am the executive producer of Sree's Sunday New York Times Read-Along. Today, I'm the guest host, and I can't tell you how honored I am to be in the chair today, so to speak. Yes, I'm standing, but I'm in the chair. Sree was unfortunately out of town. It is always an honor and a privilege for me to take over the reins when he gives me access to his accounts and to his baby. He's been producing this show for 6 years, starting in October 6 years ago. I've been working with him for almost 3.5, 4 years now. But I can't tell you how excited I am. As many of you have mentioned on Twitter, I grew up reading Clyde Haberman's byline in the New York Times. It just is an incredible honor and a thrill. And to top it off, he's a Yankee fan. So what could be better than that, right? So thank you very much for joining us. What I want to do today real quick, and we haven't usually done this, I want to give you a quick look at what we're going to be talking about, a little preview, if you will, by looking at the Twitter thread that I put together for this show. This will give you a quick scan. We have Clyde, one of the things we're going to ask him about is a recent piece for Exploring Hate, which is a series exploring anti-Semitism, racism, and extremism with WNET in New York. We'll talk about, oh my God, highlights from his career: the Attica prison rebellion, the fall of Ferdinand Marcos, South Korea's pro-democracy uprising, the collapse of communism, which I particularly remember reading his byline for, the invasion of Kuwait, the Persian Gulf War, Oslo Accords, Islamic terrorism, 9/11. He wrote he was part of the team that won the Pulitzer Prize for its coverage of the Eliot Spitzer sex scandal. He had a column that day when it broke. He also wrote the New York City column, the NYC column, twice weekly. And we have a link to his last column, his 30 column, and he'll explain to us what that means, of course. We have a link to a Politico article where he talks about his family and his column and the Yankees, which we both love. And I was particularly pleased to share this on August 21st, 2017. He and his daughter Maggie both had bylines on the front page, and it was certainly a proud moment for Clyde. His son Zach is at the New York Post as managing editor. His daughter Emma works with World Central Kitchen with Chef Jose Andres. We want to also call attention to a few things in the Times this week. On Thursday, they devoted their Thursday Style section to Virgil Abloh, who passed away earlier this week. Took over the whole section. And then Friday's paper had an interesting new initiative called Headway, which was designed by Wayne Kamadal and led by Matt Thompson, rather. Other pieces in the Headway package are by Kimmelman and others that you see listed here. There's also a special Sondheim package in today's Arts and Leisure. And then at the end of the show, we'll share about a Women to Follow show coming up on December 7th. She's on call next week. And then thank our sponsor. We'll go ahead and thank our sponsor now. Muck Rack is a great partner to Sree and the New York Times Read-Along. They've been supporting our work. So we want to thank you for that. We also want to recognize our production team, Paula Kiger, Steve Taylor, Julia Weeks, and Carla Baranakis. And they're all part of Digimentors, the social and digital consulting firm that Sri started. I'm the Vice President of Events and Communications for Digimentors, and we are thrilled to have you join us today. So that's a little bit of a preview of what we're going to cover. I want to welcome all the folks who are tuning in. And as usual, one of our early guests. Hi, Ma. How you doing? My mom is watching from Hastings-on-Hudson, New York, from the house. Oh, actually, she's in Tampa. I forgot. She went down to Tampa after visiting us in DC for Thanksgiving week. So thank you, Mom. It was great having you here. Emily really loved seeing you as well after about 2 years. Doug Levy is joining us from the San Francisco Bay Area. He's excited, just as I am, for today's guest. He's so excited, he got up at 5:30 in the morning and is stirring at 5:30, which is really incredible. Our friend Stefan Kaplan is here. He's joining from Ramsey, New Jersey. Stefan, thank you so much. Thank you for all the work you do to help support the show. Stefan was a photo editor at the New York Times for a number of years. Jamie Shum is joining us from Dutchess County, and it's been a while since she's tuned in. She mentioned on Twitter she hasn't been able to catch the show live in a bit, but she made it a point to join us for Clyde Haberman, which I suspect a lot of people are doing. Manuel Llaneras is joining us as well. Courtney Keeley is in the house, and another Yankee fan. So if you are a Yankee fan, please make sure to let me know. If you're a Mets fan, I don't really care. Don't bother. But Diane Stefani is here from Margate, New Jersey. She's looking forward to this amazing show with world-renowned journalist Clyde Haberman. Kieran Griffith is here from Harrington Park, New Jersey. And Paula Kiger put in a link to the thread that I put in Facebook. Paula, one of our team members, will put in links to articles and other items we're discussing to provide context and engage with the audience. Thank you, Paula, for all of your work to support the show. Apollo is joining from Philadelphia. Pragna is joining from Silver Spring, Maryland. Thank you, Pragna. Jonathan Borstein is watching from New York. Hello, Jonathan. We have, and Paula's from Tallahassee. Miriam is joining from Hell's Kitchen, New York. Bob Veritoni from Bergen County, New Jersey. Good morning, Bob. Colleen Schuster, a friend of Paula's from Tallahassee. All of these people are joining to watch this interview with Clyde Haberman. Deborah Bernick, happy last night of Hanukkah from DC. Chag Sameach, Deborah, and everyone who celebrates Hanukkah this year. Jeannie Pinder is joining us, a former guest on the show. Thank you for joining us. And she said, Clyde Haberman is a national treasure. I couldn't agree more. Again, if you're just joining us, our guest today is Clyde Haberman. He was the former Pulitzer Prize winning former columnist and editorial writer at the New York Times. 13 years as a correspondent based in Tokyo, Rome, and Jerusalem, but that does not cover the full spread of his career. We'll certainly talk to him about that. So before I bring on Clyde, I'm just going to give you a quick tour of the paper to see what we have in store for today. So let's go ahead and do that. We have the New York Times here. Here's the front page. The lead story, of course, on the top right, GOP voting bills raise the stakes for races in 2022, and a variant hunt from the labs to dirt roads, the hunt in South Africa. The display story is absolutely tragic. The hunger catastrophe in Afghanistan, aid groups fear millions may die as calls grow to ease U.S. sanctions. Below the fold, we have right there on the bottom left, anchor is fired as CNN reviews Cuomo scandal. Chris Cuomo, not only for helping his brother and crossing some journalistic ethical lines, but also apparently, if I understand correctly, there may have been some allegations of harassment against him as well. On this article, college's coaching carousel rewards soar. high-paid coaches in college football. And then here's an article. He ran without firing a shot and ended up on death row. This is an article about someone who's been referred to as rechristened the cop killer, Nathaniel Woods. But Mr. Woods never killed anyone. He was unarmed when the officers were gunned down while rushing into a cramped drug house to execute a warrant. So we'll take a look at that section later. Sunday review. The focus is on, you can see from above the fold, my body. This is about abortion, my body, my choice. What went wrong? How the abortion rights movement failed to stop the erosion of Roe v. Wade. Everyone is watching the case from Mississippi, assuming that the court will be potentially overturning this landmark decision. Sunday business. What happened to Amazon's bookstore? There's the graphic you could see of the books. And then also Condé Nast knows faded glory is not in style. Sunday styles, great picture of Denzel Washington. He's in a new movie, Macbeth, envisioned by Joel Cohen. What Denzel Knows by Maureen Dowd. So that should be an interesting read as well. Here's the arts and leisure piece I mentioned earlier, or the cover. This is Remembering Stephen Sondheim. I'm going to give you most of the full page. So we'll take a look at that. And at the bottom, an ad for You Dare Not Miss the Lehman Trilogy. And we'll ask Clyde about that. I believe that he is expecting to see that in the next few days. The New York Times Magazine, The Abortion I Didn't Have. I never thought about ending my pregnancy. Instead, at 19, I erased the future I had imagined for myself. Just a heartbreaking story. I'll get to this in a moment. We have the book review, which is the holiday books section, and Worlds of Wonder. Animation's greatest magician, Hayao Miyazaki, comes out of retirement to cast one last spell. I want to call attention to this because I thought this was interesting. We always like paying attention to the ads in the paper. This is an insert for Get the Book and Take Action to Cut Carbon Emissions by visiting speedandscale.com. A 10-point action plan, which I think you can see just to the bottom, electrify transportation all the way down to win with politics and policy, turn movements into an action, and then details on the back. So that's an interesting, I don't remember seeing an ad like this, a glossy insert, double-sided insert like this to get people's attention. So that is certainly worth paying attention to. But again, that is what we have in store for the paper. In store for us, for you today, is Clyde Haberman, and we'll go ahead and bring him on to the screen and start this incredible interview. Clyde, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Good morning. It's rare for me to be fully clothed at 8:30 on a Sunday morning, so this is great.
Thank you for being fully clothed. We and our viewers appreciate that.
Oh, I bet they would. Yeah.
But more importantly, you're stirring, right? You get up.
I am. But, I'm almost awake. Yeah.
Almost awake. Not everyone's camera ready, much less getting ready to think on their feet and come up with some good comments. You saw from the welcomes I did for folks, and I'll bring back Clyde Haberman is a national treasure. I can't overstate it. Several other people that commented on Twitter talked about how they read your byline over the years. It is an honor and a privilege. Eve Batello is here as well. Ted Coltman has joined us. And let's see who else. Patricia Freudenberg is watching. She's out of town. She's usually in New York, but she's watching on LinkedIn. Therese Steiner, who is actually in Yonkers, near my hometown of Hastings-on-Hudson, is actually in Baltimore. I believe her brother lives there. Therese, thank you as always. And then Suzanne is joining us from Atlanta. So you have a number of people who have come out to watch the show.
No, I appreciate it. I appreciate it. And Gene Pinder's a longtime colleague and friend. And So anything she says to some degree has to be discounted in that regard as a friend. But no, I appreciate she's very kind.
She's also a former guest on our show. So
I know.
We loved having her.
I knew that.
And Carla, who worked with you at the New York Times, she worked on the continuous news desk and as a national copy chief. Clyde was always one of my favorite people in the newsroom. So it's not just a question of people who admire you from afar, as I have, but people who've worked up close. At least one person like you. Hopefully, one or two other people might say something similar. I don't know.
Yeah, well, I think you'd be stretching the limits of those who would feel that way. But yeah, okay. But that would be fine. I know I have offended a few people along the way, but by and large, I like to think I'm a reasonably collegial fellow.
At least not yet this morning. So that's a good start.
Not yet.
And for those who might be joining us for the first time, and we're also live on your Twitter account, so thank you for that. We produce the New York Times Read Along every week with special guests. And as I said, some guests are more special than others. Right off the bat and in our prep calls, you see Clyde and I are already going back and forth, ribbing each other just a little bit. So you can, I think, expect more of the same for the rest of today's show. There's a lot of serious news to cover. There's a lot of history and career to talk about. But we're also going to have some fun along the way. Naomi is joining us. She's anticipating a terrific show. No pressure on you, Clyde, all on me. Okay. And then our friend Rahadyan is also watching from Center Reach, New Jersey. He didn't work with you, but always appreciate your steadfast.
But we were together in the newsroom, indeed. Yeah.
In the newsroom, he always appreciated your steadfast, intelligent presence in the newsroom. So this is great. So what I want to do is ask you, as we do all of our guests, and as I encourage people to let us know where they're watching from. It's about a year and 3/4 now since the pandemic shut everything down in March of 2020. Yeah. Clyde, what has the last year and 3/4 been like for you? How's your family? How have your close friends been? What has been your experience?
By and large, I mean, our experience, I think, has been pretty common. Our world has shrunk. My wife, Kathy Jones, and I have not traveled very much. For somebody who used to travel the world to some degree, it's been a bit confining. We both got COVID earlier this year. Our contact was with somebody who then was hospitalized. She's fine now, as are we. Fortunately, we had our first COVID shot 5 days before this contact. So the symptoms were relatively mild, involving principally loss of smell or great diminution, which still lingers, by the way. This whole long haul business turns out to be somewhat real, at least. And obviously, there are people who are suffering tremendously from it. We are not. You mentioned the play, the Lehman Trilogy, the other night. Tuesday night, we have tickets for it, and I'm really excited. It's the first time I'll have been in the theater since this all started. I do love going to movies. We do love the theater. Kathy beat me to the getting to the theater punch the other night. She went with a friend to see Assassins, a Sondheim musical at Classic Stage Company and on East 13th Street. So I'm really excited and about being able to get back to something approaching normal. And it's not an absence of normal for anybody. We have begun to eat indoors in restaurants from time to time. But yeah, there's no question that, as with everybody, as I said at the start, our world has shrunk and we're all ready to bust out. And I find myself day by day increasingly angry at those refusing to be vaccinated. They are keeping all the rest of us from getting back to normal. It is an act of high selfishness on their part. I know most of them like to cast it as some sort of principle, and government's not going to tell me what to do, blah, blah, blah. It's nonsense. I was 10 years old when the Salk vaccine came into our lives. I'm 76 years old. So anybody, at least 10 years younger than I may not appreciate the terror with which everyone lived, especially in summer when people would be in swimming pools and whatever, which was a prime source of contagion. And I don't know anybody my age who didn't know people who had polio. Some cases quite severe. Some died. And in 1955 came the Salk polio vaccine, and it was as if God himself had handed us a gift. I'm pretty convinced now that if today's attitude about this vaccine had existed back then in the 50s and subsequent years, that we'd still be struggling in this country with polio, as some less developed countries still are.
Sure.
Not to mention measles, mumps, rubella, and so on, childhood diseases. I had every one of them except mumps. And that was, again, very, very common in my age cohort.
And I don't think, I'm sorry to interrupt, I don't think it's a question of having been born at a time when polio was an issue to appreciate vaccines. I certainly grew up with vaccines, and I share your concern, and we've been very careful under COVID. It seems like it's part of this larger discourse over the last 30 years or so. It's not just, and I'm going to put it squarely on the hands of Republicans for the most part. There are some liberals who are also anti-vaxxers. Famously Robert RFK Jr. But a lot of it is this distrust of government, this distrust of institutions, that they've been focused on bringing down the system for so long. And this seems just like the latest incarnation of that.
Yep, absolutely. I'm still mindful of a sign early in basically it was an anti-Obama movement, that started in 2008, 2009, and a demonstration in which somebody held up a sign that said, keep government hands off my Social Security. Hello, it's a government plan. And the lunkheadedness of all this is astounding. But I'm speaking a little bit from a selfish point of view, which I'm sure is shared by most everybody who's watching and most Americans. We want to get back to normal. Well, we have a secret. It's called a vaccine.
And masks.
And masks. And you get that and you're done. And I don't like wearing a mask any more than anybody else does. But it's for most of us, it's short term. I don't work in a supermarket. I don't need to keep it on 8 hours. It's whatever, 15, 20 minutes of shopping. Surely you can do it.
Sure. My friend Renea Sabri, she thinks it's distrust of the unknown and the untried. Renea is a friend of mine from Egypt. I worked there for 2 years, and she recently moved here to Northern Virginia. Renea, looking forward to getting together with you soon, albeit outdoors and safe. Therese, I wanted to thank you for the Assassin shout out. She's a Classic Stage Company board member, and they're also moved that Stephen Sondheim saw his incredible work on opening night.
Therese, yes, a very good friend of ours. Lynn Engelson is the chair of the Classic Stage Company, and they've done wonderful shows. It's a small house on East 13th Street in New York, and they do terrific stuff. And they were about to stage Assassins when the curtain came down on all of us. So they're very excited to have it back.
And Therese is a great friend of the show, of Sri and myself. She actually recently asked me to join the board of Justice Aid, a great group that she's a part of. So Therese, thank you for your support of the read along. You mentioned in terms of going to the theater, we talked about Stephen Sondheim. What you tweeted about him when news came out that he had passed. What is your take? What was your assessment of Stephen Sondheim's career, his contributions to theater?
Oh, I don't know if I have anything much original to add. I mean, I was a huge fan, and sort of who isn't? I've yet to hear or read anybody saying, "Well, he was overrated." No, he wasn't. I would encourage everybody, if you haven't, or if you didn't already read it, Bruce Weber did a majestic, not even just a darn nice, but a majestic obituary of him last weekend, and it's a brilliant work. And I've seen a number of Sondheim productions, including, as I mentioned, Assassins, seen Company, Sweeney, Todd, um, a little Night Music. It may have become a cliche, but I do enjoy playing Isn't It Rich on the piano. And one or two others. Assassins was not one of my favorites, I must admit. So I did not join my wife the other evening at Classic Stage. But it's impossible not to just be spellbound by the man's genius. And by the way, I should go back to shows that he worked on that he didn't do the music necessarily, did the lyrics, like Gypsy, like West Side Story, which is having a multi-form revival. And so, I did tweet, was it on Twitter? No, it was actually in a conversation with an old friend. I went back and looked at the lyrics to a song called A Little Priest from Sweeney Todd. And if you're not familiar with the show, Sweeney Todd is known as the demon barber of Fleet Street. He goes mad. And he goes mad along with a Mrs. Lovett, who makes meat pies, whose shop is not doing very well in selling these pies. And Sweeney has become murderous, and they cook up a scheme, if you will, to bake the victims into meat pies. And they start the song, A Little Priest, is about all the different types of people, different walks of life, that they're going to bake into pies. And I can't do justice to the lyrics by repeating them here. It is hysterically funny and verbally just brilliant. And Sondheim was the kind of guy, when you read what he wrote, that just made you, well, why should I bother writing anything myself anymore? I can't compare it to this guy. Really, I mean, I'm sure at some point there'll be a revisionist view of some form. I just haven't heard it yet. The man was brilliant. Quite obviously.
So I want to get a few other comments in there. Emily Silverman, joining from Philadelphia. She says she's been grateful for your writing for ages, and it's the introduction to Antonio Venditti by Emma that brings me reliable joy.
Thank you.
So Emma is, you were mentioning your daughter earlier. And my mom makes a reference to people resisting the smallpox vaccination in the past, but the government took firm action to vaccinate people. That was certainly much needed. I'd like to, flash on the screen a few of your highlights from your career, just a few. But I made reference to this earlier in terms of the scope. The Attica Prison Rebellion, Ferdinand Marcos, the pro-democracy uprising. I remember in particular the Eastern Europe, the fall of communism, but the Iraqi invasion, the Persian Gulf War, the Oslo Accords, the rise of Islamic terrorism. When you look back at that body of work, and that doesn't include, of course, the New York City column and your work there. What stands out for you? What are the three or so top memories, if you will?
Oh, that's difficult. Excuse me. There were so many. One that does stand out dealt with the so-called Oslo Accords. And as a reminder to folks who may forget, this was 1993, and Israel negotiators and Palestinian negotiators, working principally in Oslo, Norway, had come to some sort of peace agreement. Its basic provisions provided for measures of Palestinian autonomy in the West Bank and fully in Gaza, starting with the Gaza Strip and the town of Jericho, which is rather remote in its way. It's the word sleepy and Jericho are often put in the same sentence. The agreement was sealed on the White House lawn on September 13th, I believe it was, 1993. And a famous handshake between the Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin of Israel and Yasser Arafat, the leader of the Palestine Liberation Organization. And one of the big questions was, would they shake hands? These arch enemies going back many years. That was on a Monday. Saturday, I was given one of the few interviews with Rabin. It would have been on Saturday night in his residence in Jerusalem. He was going to fly off to Washington a few hours later. And I asked him that inevitable question of, will you shake his hand? And he began to make these circular motions around his stomach. And he said the way he phrased it, and the conversation was in English, was there are certain feelings of rejection, which basically meant I feel like throwing up. This was, I don't know what Arafat's feelings were about that. I never got to interview Arafat, but Rabin was clearly in emotional turmoil. And that was, for me, a fascinating moment. I'd interviewed him several times, and he was never a good interview. I should throw in that most interviews I've had with national leaders have been disappointing. In that, well, it could be my questions are just not very good, and always a possibility. But in fact, they're kind of programmed. They don't really say a ton of things that they haven't said 85 times. And Rabin was singularly inarticulate, both in Hebrew and in English. It's not just the language issue. And but this time, it was a terrific interview because he clearly was a man who knew he was at the precipice of an historic moment, and one that was giving him agita. Because he was stepping into the unknown. Covering parts of the revolution against communist leaders, I sort of had the Balkans part of it, if you will, Romania and Bulgaria principally. Was also very exciting to watch societies change. The similar feeling, even more so, in the Philippines, covering the overthrow of the longtime dictator Ferdinand Marcos back in 1986. And it wasn't clear how that was going to go. It wasn't clear if Marcos was going to order his military to take part against those who were rebelling against, to go march and fire on those who were rebelling against them. Nor was it clear if they would resist, what would happen. That did not happen. Marcos, with American assistance, fled the country. But that was a terribly exciting moment. It was one of those rare moments when there was a distinct good guy and a bad guy. I tend to live in a world of gray. I tend not to see the world in black and white because, in my view, it isn't usually that. Life's a lot more nuanced. But that was a clear, there are good guys and bad guys. And even though I could sense right away there in the Philippines that this was not going to turn into the world's most flourishing democracy, and the recent President Duterte has proved that to be the case. At that moment, it was so exhilarating to see people throw off a dictatorship. I've seen others do it. South Korea was another example, but the Philippines just had a joyfulness about it that was very hard to duplicate anywhere else. I'm sorry, I'm not hearing you.
My apologies. Those are some incredible moments in history. the Oslo Peace Accords. We showed the handshake earlier when you were speaking, the fall of Eastern Europe, the fall of Marcos. Jess Esch, a friend of mine from Maine, a former colleague when I worked at United Way, quoting you, saying, "I tend to live in a world of gray." Hashtag swoon. She certainly appreciates that approach. Another former guest of the show and a friend of yours, Ralph Blumenthal, looking and sounding good, Clyde. Looking and sounding good. I think that's...
Ralph was my first editor. We were both City College of New York boys. He was the editor of the student newspaper, The Campus, when I joined it. He was in his final year. And
wow.
And he'll tell you he taught me everything I know. and I always tell him I know so little that he's to blame. Ralph's a wonderful journalist. And
we're waiting for a rejoinder there, Ralph. We're looking for another comment from you. So that takes you back. You must know him almost 50 years at that point, right? A little less than 50.
You're being very, very kind. No, let's try closer to 60. That would have gone back to 1962.
62. Wow. Yeah. Wow. That is incredible. And certainly before you were both at the New York Times together, which is great. He says, "Don't blame me." So I guess a little bit back and forth. Dr. Chandrasekhar, Sujana Chandrasekhar, saying this is a magical recollection of events that we all read about with bated breath. Absolutely, Sujana. And as I showed earlier, the She's on Call show, which is going to be next week, next Sunday, Dr. Chandrasekhar and Dr. Marina Kurian are the co-hosts of that show. So thank you. Rick Botello is asking a question. What can we learn from the long-term failures of the Oslo agreements to prevent history repeating itself? What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, it's an interesting question. I don't know if the Oslo agreements themselves were inherently flawed. The basic premise behind them was, let's start out small and then move on to the bigger issues. A mistake that many people made, and I'm certainly among them, was to think, and I've written about this in the past, I truly felt that the two sides had finally broken the key barrier before them. They each recognized the other's humanity, each recognized the other is not going away, and that they had to figure out how to cohabit the postage stamp size land that they shared. And I thought that the importance of Oslo was the psychological breakthrough. The political underlying premises were, let's build on it. We'll start with Gaza, excuse me, which is isolated and a sad place that, frankly, very few people, sorry, frog in my throat, that Israel was glad to get rid of in many respects. And Jericho, as I said, the word sleepy is often attached to it for good reason. It's a quiet town, not much happens there. And then expand on it to other Palestinian areas and build from there, and then deal at the end with the most difficult questions: what to do about the families of Palestinians who left that area and after the 1948 war of what Israel calls the War of Independence, and what Palestinians refer to as the disaster, the Nakba, and then, of course, what to do about Jerusalem. And I thought the psychological breakthrough had happened. Again, I'm not the only one who made this mistake. Because what we've seen, obviously, and now nearly 30 years later, is very little cooperation, very little movement, and no negotiations, and the finger pointing goes round and round and round and round. And I'd rather not get into it because I suspect my finger would point at both sides greatly. There is a tendency on those who are unhappy with Israel, to see the Palestinians as purely as victims. And again, I live in a world of gray. I saw an awful lot of Palestinian leadership not grabbing opportunities when they had them. And a good one being back in 2001, in the final days of, in 2000, in the final months of the Clinton administration, where there was a good chance for a settlement. The Israeli prime minister then was Ehud Barak, and Arafat just could not bring himself to yes. And so it was a lost moment, and things have just deteriorated, as we all know, greatly since then. Even Israeli friends of mine who were very supportive of Oslo soon became very disenchanted, and I don't pretend to know how to get back on track, or whether they can even get on track. It's a despairing situation.
As Joan Detz shared, history brought to life, certainly. I want to switch gears a little bit
Sure.
before we head to the paper. There was a great before, you have this front page that we shared in the Twitter thread has some special bylines in it. This was from August 21st, 2017. You and your daughter Maggie both had bylines on A1. Tell us a little bit what that meant to you, and watching her and Zach follow in your footsteps in journalism.
Oh, well, that paper was a wonderful moment. Dick Gregory, whose obituary did I do
in the bottom right corner?
In the bottom corner, but I believe I have to take my glasses off to do this. Is Jerry Lewis next to it?
Jerry Lewis, you're right.
And in recent years, I've been doing a lot of what we call advanced obituaries. The Times has a large file of obituaries of people, both well known and not so well known, interesting, sometimes not so interesting, on file. The last time I asked our obituaries editor, I think the figure was something like 1,800. Maybe it's more now. And I enjoyed doing them because they're really about interesting lives. The death is obviously the way, the news peg for it. But in fact, once you get past the fact that the person is dead, you are then going into his or her life, and it's usually quite interesting. So I had done Dick Gregory's the comedian, a couple of years earlier, and I got a call on a Saturday night at about 11 o'clock at home to say that Dick Gregory had died, and they were putting the obituary online. The call came from Hong Kong. The Times has it's sort of like passing the torch.
Three desks. Yeah,
3 desks. I think the other one is maybe in London.
In London.
So as time zones change and so on, it moves on. In Hong Kong, 11 at night here in New York, it was 11 in the morning the next morning in Hong Kong. So it went up online right away. And again, it was a Saturday night. It did not make the paper. The first edition is off the presses, noonish, 1 in the afternoon on Saturday. They weren't going to break up the paper for this. So it ran Monday morning. By coincidence, on Sunday, Jerry Lewis died. And I'm not sure if Dick Gregory would have been out there only on his own, but here we had two well-known comedians of an earlier era dying on the same day. So they twinned them on page 1. And Maggie had a couple of stories out there, which was rather typical for her in the Trump era. And so there we were. I asked Al Siegel, who was our very long-time standards editor and keeper of the newsroom flame in many ways, if there was any precedent for that. We've had plenty of father and son or daughter combos at the Times over the years, not necessarily simultaneously, but a fair number. But had there ever been father and child on page one? And he could recall no other instance. So it was quite exciting. And naturally, of course, her stories got higher play than mine. What can I tell you?
Absolutely.
Higher up on the page. So because no, I'm joking, of course, but it's no, it was a fascinating moment. But the only way that can ever happen again is if people die. I'm not that much. I'm not that solipsistic that I need people to die for my entertainment. So we shall see. But there will be others. I've written about 35 so far, advance obituaries, and with the exception of Dick Gregory and Roger Ailes, and that of our former publisher, author Oak Sulzberger, I've been giving people admirably long lives. In fact, I interview folks for a lot of these obituaries, not all of them, but a fair number. And my pitch line to them is that if you believe there's such a thing as the angel of death, think of me as the angel of life. I mean, I've written these and nobody dies. The one on Mr. Sulzberger, for example, I was detached from my column in 1998 by Joe Lelyveld, who was then our executive editor, Joseph Lelyveld. And by that point, Punch, which was his nickname, Punch had given up all his titles at the paper. He had relinquished the publishership to his son 6 years earlier, and a year earlier he stopped being chairman of the board. So Joe thought a year had passed. It was a respectful time to get Punch's advance obit ready, and that required a lot of work and a lot of interviews. The piece ran about 8,000 words, and so I was off for a month or more, but other than those three guys, nobody's died of me. It was interesting with Punch. Punch was the first person I interviewed for an obit, and I interviewed him in a couple of sessions. And I was very uncomfortable about this. Again, I was not familiar with interviewing people for what was going to be their death. And so when I first sat down with him, I said to him, Punch, before we even start, can I just tell you how uncomfortable this makes me? And he said, you know, of course, I'm the one who's dying here. So I mentioned that because I wrote that in 1998. He died in 2012. So 14 years. So again, nobody's yet, with those exceptions.
This is the bottom of that front page that features your obit of Dick Gregory on the right, and the two columns by Maggie Haberman, two pieces on the top right. Trump chooses a path forward for Afghanistan. Charlottesville shifted timing of Bannon exit. Your son, Zach, is at the New York Post as managing editor. Just recently joined them.
He is. He's the managing editor there. He had gone from NBC. He had been a senior editor at the Daily News. And then I guess it was maybe 4 years ago, and we're also Maggie's husband, Daria Grigorian, worked. Daria's now at NBC. And Maggie and Daria met at the New York Post years ago. And the Chicago Tribune bought the Daily News back, actually rebought it. It had once owned it years ago from Mort Zuckerman. And almost the first thing they did was just have a bloodbath of firings. Not for cause by any means. They just were cutting budgets left and right. And both my son and my son-in-law wound up on the cutting room floor, if you will. So so they both went to NBC. And anyway, Zach was went back to the New York Post where he had been before. And here's hoping all goes well. And since you're probably going to ask it, I'll anticipate it. You mentioned earlier, Emma is the only honest one in the family. She's not a journalist, and she is a senior official with World Central Kitchen, which was created by Jose Andres, a well-known Spanish chef, who has devoted himself in recent years to feeding disaster victims. One of the early ones were victims of the big earthquake in Puerto Rico several years ago, but it's gone on to, those who victims of the huge fires in California, various disasters, and be it in Haiti, be it in Indonesia, I believe, and a bunch of other places, some of which are probably not safe to work in. Haiti right now, it strikes me as a place that's not particularly safe to work in. But
absolutely.
And so yeah, she helps keep this going, and is a key figure in it. So yeah,
and what a family, as Therese says.
Well, thank you. I'm very proud of all my kids, and I wouldn't have minded if one of them became a banker to take care of their old man and his dotage, but that didn't happen. So there we go.
Kathleen, in particular, is weighing in with an Emma Rocks, and Ralph. Is Kathleen a friend of yours? A friend of
Kathleen
Struck?
I don't. Oh, Kathleen Struck. Yes, I do know Kathleen Struck. Yes, from Jerusalem days.
Yes,
and definitely, yeah. And she's right. Emma Rocks.
And Ralph is all your kids done good, Clyde. All you're done, and you get credit for this. Ralph gets no credit at all.
No,
I assume.
no. Well, Ralph gets no credit for sure, but I also get no credit. No, I mean, especially with Maggie and Zach, they were children of my first marriage, and I went off overseas, and a lot of the burden. There were a lot of wonderful things about that, but they were principally living in New York and would come out for summers and Christmas vacations, sometimes spring. And it all sounds very glamorous, but it also meant that they didn't have an infrastructure of their own in a lot of these places. So, and they'd arrive in summer, for example, and an awful lot of, without a real grounding in, let's say, Japanese or Italian, and as much as they appreciated both those countries and others that we traveled to, that they didn't have the same kind of grounding as children, and they were young then, as children who lived there full time. So there was a burden placed on them by being the children of a foreign correspondent, and life often interfered. For example, we were talking about the collapse of communism. I ran off from Rome to Romania when its longtime dictator Nicolae Ceausescu was overthrown in just before Christmas in. I'm sorry, I'm really blanking on the year. 89. Thank you. Yeah. In 89, I had to see
December 20th or so.
Exactly, and off I went, and that was a very complicated story, and very difficult to get into the country. It was very unsafe,
very violent.
In many respects, it was extremely violent, and both Ceausescu's, Nicolae and his wife, were executed by the revolutionaries, and Maggie and Zach arrived on their winter vacations like a day or so after I'd run off to Bucharest, and I hoped to get. I never got back. I never saw them, and I was never able to leave Romania in time to see them. And this happened. Versions of this happened with astounding frequency. Similar thing happened. The pro-democracy uprising in South Korea in 1987 coincided with my kids' arrival to Tokyo, where I lived then, and I covered South Korea a lot, and it was a rather frequent occurrence. The assassination of Ninoy Aquino sent me off to the Philippines while they were in Japan. The foreign desk called me up at something like 4 a.m. and asked me to go down to the Philippines. And I said, I've got 2 sleeping kids in the next room. They were then something like 10 and 7. So I had to figure that out. So, yeah, there was a certain excitement and glamour about being in these places, but there were also some burdens, and they put up with their share of them. God
and
bless them.
Miriam is saying very interesting about the children of foreign correspondents, what their experience is like. It's not often discussed. So certainly, thank you, Clyde, for sharing that. What I want to do is, before we turn to the paper, your last stop brought you home to New York. You had the NYC column,
Yes.
and this is your last column, headline "Before Going Dark: One Last Attempt at Explaining New York City," and this was your 30 column. As it were, ending pieces, journalists and people who wrote press releases would often end with a -30 to indicate there was nothing left. This was, you put it all out there in this last column. Take a moment, not so much about the column itself, but your time coming home to New York and writing about New York City. Tell us a little bit about that, and then we'll turn to the paper in about 2 minutes.
That sounds right. Well, it took me a while to relearn the city. I'm a New York boy. I'm born in the Bronx. My entire career has been New York based, with some exceptions. Before I became a foreign correspondent, including my main time away from New York would have been covering Jimmy Carter's 1976 presidential campaign. I was still at the New York Post then. But when I came back to New York after nearly 13 years as a foreign correspondent, it was a city that was already changed. I'd been back for short visits, Lord knows. The Times brings you back to every other year or so. It's like being sent back to the factory for retooling. But the city had changed. The city had changed demographically and just I wasn't quite familiar with the politics. So I had to relearn it. And that was, in a way, I approached my column, certainly early on, very much as a foreign correspondent, in trying to see the city with a little bit of detachment, not as one who is of the city, though I was, but as somebody who could look at it with a little bit of remove. I hope not a haughty remove, but a bit of a remove. That probably changed. I mean, I had the column for 13 years or so, and no, more than that. I did a column for about 16 years altogether, and it was the word culture shock is overused, the phrase, but there was some of that, and but people were very generous, both at the paper and readers. The thing about having a column that was wonderful was the interaction with readers that you don't get even on major news stories too often, because there's a certain personal relationship you have. People become invested in you, I discovered. And I imagine it's much more intense with the columnists who appear on our op-ed page.
Sure.
You have to walk a fine line with a news column, a column that appears in the news pages, because I don't have a right to absolute opinions. I can't really say this is what happened and doesn't it stink or isn't it great, but I can imply it. And I got bolder and bolder as I went along in doing that, but there was still a certain distance that had to be maintained in that regard. But readers still felt very attached, and those were the folks who liked me. Then there were those who didn't and thought I was a complete idiot. And
the Mets fans, probably.
Well, probably some Mets fans, but others, and some were thoughtful in their criticism. Others just spewed bile, and it's terrible. I see it now. I'm reasonably active on Twitter, and one can see on Twitter some of the best and some of the worst of humanity on it, because especially the negative voices who tend to be anonymous, who tend not even to use their real names on their Twitter as their Twitter handles, and there is no question that there's been a coarsening of discourse. Donald Trump has often been commented has definitely contributed to that, but it had pre-existed him, and it hasn't gotten better. And I saw it just recently, pointing to the Chris Cuomo story that's on page one. Now he's fully out now at CNN. I had tweeted when he was suspended a week ago, something to the effect of, I have mixed feelings about this. He certainly deserves the suspension, and he shouldn't be involved. But
who doesn't take care of family?
Who doesn't?
Was your tweet?
Who doesn't help a brother? And I had some people agreeing with me, but again, those who were saying, this is outrageous. He's condoning sexual predatory behavior and so on, were far more dominant. And again, once again, in uncamouflaged, uncivil language. And I just can't abide by it anymore. I'm too damn old to put up with people swearing at me. You want to disagree with me? Of course. I hardly make any pretense of having a monopoly on wisdom. Far from it. But at least be civil.
Civil discourse is certainly
taking a big hit. It's taking a big hit.
Yeah. Absolutely. So we have about a half hour left in the show. We could do this for much longer. So much great content to cover. But I want to turn to the paper for a little bit, and then we'll come back to the end, and we'll bring that up on the screen. This is, of course, the Sunday New York Times. Clyde, tell me, we're going to go through the front page, but as we do, if there are articles that jump out at you, please certainly flag them for us. We already looked at the front page section. Right. Page 2 and 3 are also very interesting. My favorite is the Insider column on the left-hand side, Reader's Choice at the Book Review. Editors ask you to vote for the best book published in the last 125 years. We actually had Tina Jordan on the show celebrating the 125th anniversary of the Book Review the weekend that came out. That was an incredible honor.
That was a wonderful edition. That section that day it was fascinating to read. As is today's. I've read a fair number of them. It's a very thick section. It's
the holiday
books and whatever. So it's a very thick section. But there's some terrific reviews in there, including a book on female war correspondents of past generations that grabbed me.
I'll follow your lead. Let's go right to the book review.
But the page one, right here. I haven't had a chance.
Book review or page one?
Well,
what's your preference?
Very quickly on page one, if I may, I haven't had a chance to read every story in depth,
sure.
But definitely the hunger that is gripping Afghanistan, and with a shocking, worrisome prediction that as many as a million people might die, which is more than were killed in the endless war there, is very much not just a compelling read, but an essential read, as is the story on the bottom. Anything that involves Dan Barry should be read. And this is by Dan Barry and Abby Ellen, on a guy who was executed, wound up on death row, and he had never, this is in Alabama, I believe, and he had been part of a robbery. He himself never fired a shot, but he was part of a holdup that killed people, and Alabama law allows for the death penalty, even for somebody in his situation, and he did not help himself very often with his own manner in court and before various boards. But again, it is compelling reading wherever you stand on the on capital punishment issue.
Absolutely. Dan Barry is a great friend of the show. He came on when we did a tribute to Jim Dwyer when after Jim passed away last year. And then we also produced, our firm Digimentors produced the memorial service for Jim's family. And Dan was one of the speakers.
Yes, I know. I was on that Zoom. That was a terrible loss. Jim was just a wonderful, wonderful fellow, brilliant journalist, but more importantly, just a terrific person. And
absolutely,
we were all devastated by his death.
Ken Fisher said earlier, the shades of gray wisdom, fairness is what I love about Mr. H, as he calls you, Mr. H.
So with him on Twitter.
Your choice, book review or the rest
go
of
ahead. Book review is fine. Book
review. So this is the holiday books section, special rather. And you said there were a couple that stood out to you.
Well, I mentioned that one.
Foreign correspondence?
Deep in the back. Let me see if I can get it quickly.
Interview with Bette Midler.
Yeah, I haven't had a chance to read that yet. Sorry.
I'll just flip through it as we get there. What's interesting, I like that every now and then the graphic design on the book review is a little bit different.
Right.
And this time they put the topic in a red font at the top, and then they have the Sex and the City by Paulina Bren, a larger font, blue, with the author in red.
It's on page 74, Neil.
Okay.
Women warriors.
Let's go.
Now I'm drawn to it in part because it's about folks who are in my line of work, obviously, but it is an interesting page 74. There it is.
Here we go.
On the left there, and it's a look at earlier. There are plenty of women now who cover wars, including Ann Barnard of our newspaper, who did heroic work in covering the ordeal of Syria of recent years. And but this goes to women of the World War I, World War II generations, like Martha Gellhorn, who's probably the best known among them. She and Ernest Hemingway were. I can't remember if they were actually married. But anyway, it's worth a read. And there are, I wish I could remember some others, but other pieces, I mean, in this book review. But it's worth curling up on the couch or your armchair with the section today. There's a lot of good reading in there. It's
thicker than usual. It's certainly a thicker section.
Yeah.
We'll just flip through a little bit more. The Well-Mannered Surrealist by Deborah Solomon. Hollywood by Lisa Schwarzbaum. Again, the layout and these seem like much longer reviews as well, not just higher quantity, but more in depth. Full page reviews for a lot of these.
Well, yeah, that's not that unusual. I've done my share of book reviews, and of course there are a lot of lists, like children's books to buy you just passed and so on. No, it's well worth, and it draws advertising, and that's always good. I love to see thick newspapers, and obviously
absolutely.
They've been thinner and thinner in recent years as we've all moved online. I had reason, I won't go into the reason, but I had reason to interview our former president a couple of years ago. And he predicted, this would have been maybe 3 years ago, and he predicted that within 10 years, there would not be a print paper. I don't think that's right.
You're talking about the former president of the CEO
of the Times Company, yeah.
Not the other president.
No, not of the guy who
that would have been Maggie's job. I see.
Yeah. met Donald Trump, but I've never interviewed him. And
Sure.
No, I think the print paper will be around for a good while longer. Whether it's forever or not, who knows? Nothing's forever. But even if it winds up being a very niche product, I think the niche will remain. As it is, print circulation is much below what it once was at its peak. We all know that. Out of curiosity, I looked up the Times in 1987, so maybe in October. The Sunday paper, one day in 1987, it was weighed 12 pounds. It was more than 1,600 pages. We're never going to see that again.
No.
But and I think a lot of people feel as I do, and as I have for quite a while. I really don't much care if people are reading me in print or in pixels on screen. Writing is writing, reading is reading, and I know that we read differently on screen than we do in print as humans, but again, for a news article, I don't think it makes all that much of a difference. And if the print paper does cease to exist one day, well, so be it. That will be a lot of money that goes to producing that product that can go to perhaps hiring more foreign correspondents or book reviewers. And so on.
One of the things that we like to say, and of course, we've been doing this show for 6 years. It's very much an homage to the New York Times, but specifically to print journalism. We actually look at the print edition of the Sunday Times and celebrate that. And a lot of people watch the show to we talk about the layout and the graphic design, point out the ads, etc. And so I think one of the things that we've talked to a lot of guests about is the fact that yes, online, it's easier to share, it's easier to tweet, certainly. You get a lot of views with that. But with print, you get serendipity. You flip through a section, and if you're flipping through book review, you might fall upon an article that capture the picture might get your attention, or the headline. You might read a story you wouldn't have thought to otherwise, as opposed to if you're searching for something or looking at a specific section. When I look on my phone, I focus on the home screen. I look at sports, and I wait for the paper to actually look through more briefly. Insider and book review are other ones that I tend to go to specifically.
Serendipity is a key word there. The chances of you landing by accident on something intriguing on screen is probably a lot less likely than it was when you're reading in the print paper. And that included, in the days of heavier advertising, that included the occasional advertising that hit your eye that just came out of nowhere.
Like this piece from Google, a co-branded ad, Google Pixel 6 and Times brand. There's power in being seen, and there is strength in documenting our stories. Kennedy Carter. So that's interesting. Here's an interesting large story in the international section. Rio de Janeiro Dispatch, a noisy, filthy city hangout is back. Cheers to that. That's a lot of photography with that. An agitator tries to win votes, a la de Gaulle in France.
That's going to be an interesting race to watch. This guy is a Trump-like figure in France. And Lord knows Trump draws more than his share of anti-Semites. This guy happens also to be Jewish, so we'll see what happens there. Interesting.
Spyware hacks in Uganda expand to journalists and opposition figure. That's the headline on the top right. Congo oust top leader of state mining company. Here's the inside. The jump on the hunger catastrophe looms for millions of Afghans. That's the left-hand side of the page, as you can see there. And we'll keep going here. Here's the national section. Any tree questions? Ask the mayor of Rockefeller Center. Are you a Rockefeller Center fan? Did you spend a lot of time there?
Am I a fan? No, I like Rockefeller Center. Yeah.
Like the tree and the whole thing?
No, I kind of avoid it this time of year because it's overcrowded, and I don't. My elbows aren't as sharp as they used to be to get through the crowds.
Here's a great full-page ad for the immersive Van Gogh experience.
Mm-hmm.
Ho Ho Go, which is an interesting approach. This is in New York, closing January 2nd. And here's a house ad, Times Talks, New York City's cultural resilience, then and now. A virtual conversation. Explore the city's resurgence and eternal cultural reinvention with Laurie Anderson, Lynn Nottage, and Sarah Schulman. So that is definitely interesting. 3 months after Hurricane Ida, still waiting for FEMA housing is a story on the top right. Here's some of the Roe v. Wade coverage. As Roe v. Wade teeters, trust in Supreme Court by public may tilt too. And then here's that piece you were talking about by Dan Barry. Right. And who was it? Abby Ellen.
Abby Ellen. Yes, it's a long piece. I've read only about half of it. I confess this morning, but I'll finish it later. But it's quite compelling. And
sure.
Again, it's not going to take sides on capital punishment, but it's an aspect that I had not fully focused on. So it's my first reaction, I confess, when I saw it was, oh my God, not another piece about some guy who was unfairly convicted. But this is quite different. He was fairly convicted. He was just not fairly executed.
Interesting.
Frankly, I don't think anybody's fairly executed, but that's another matter.
That's a different story altogether. I want to catch up on a few reader comments. Ron Thomas, a former guest on the show based in Dubai, joined us. Better late than never. For anyone who joined us late, as soon as the show is over, you'll be able to watch it from the beginning on the same channels, on the same links on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube, and on our Digimentors website. Rose Horowitz is watching from Connecticut. She still gets the print weekend newspaper and finds stories that she wouldn't find when she reads online. And she says it may not be 12 pounds, but there's still plenty to read. Certainly agree with her there. And let's see what else. Great. So we'll just keep, this is the Neediest Cases Fund. I believe Stuart Falk had tweeted that this is the 100th anniversary, if I'm not mistaken. And
it's more than that. It's more than that. It's probably closer to 120. I don't know the exact year, but it's more in the realm of 120.
And when the A1 is A section is printed, when it goes beyond 26 pages, right? That last bit, page 27, comes in as a separate section, effectively. And I always like, seeing what is it that is on that second section. Because that gets a little bit more visibility, right? If you're looking at the paper, you see this right there.
That may be true, Neil, if you're getting it in the suburbs. I believe the press capacity for any single section is 48 pages. We have not had a 48-page
in New York
main section, in
that's a good point.
In a long time, but the section can handle, the press can handle a lot more than 26 pages, but 48
at College Point in New York.
At College Point, yeah. I'll never forget when I was a copy boy at the Times. We're talking about 1964. The Warren working nights while I was still in college, and the Warren Commission report came out. The Times came out the next day with a 96-page paper all the news, including the Warren Commission report, was in the first section of 48 pages. The second
Wow.
48-page section was the entire Warren Commission report. They had just ripped it up, handed it to a whole bunch of different typesetters. This was before computers and what you call hot type. And it was one of the most extraordinary journalistic performances I'd seen. It was extraordinary. The entire, I forget how many pages that report was, but it was huge.
Wow.
And the Times' commitment to history and to what will become history is unending, as far as I could see.
So that is, I really appreciate that. And yes, the Times is printed, I believe, I don't remember the number. I think it's 16 presses around the country to get the editions out.
Right. I don't know the number. Right. But
close to that.
It's close. It's a national paper, obviously.
Yeah. This is a Washington, D.C. edition that I
Right.
got.
Okay. There you go. It's different here. That front section you're referring to, for example, here in New York is 38 pages.
Interesting.
And so, yeah, it's a national paper. There is some controversy even internally about this. There are a lot of people who feel that New York City itself gets shorter shrift than it should in the present situation. And I appreciate the feelings, but the Times made a decision some years ago that it was going to be a national paper, and it doesn't ignore New York by any means, but there's no question that it's not as New York centric as it once was.
Sure. Ralph is saying, remember the old slogan, you don't have to read it all, but it's nice to know it's all there.
It is. It is.
That might take us back a bit. My mom adds, you presented some beautiful personal and professional history with important details. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I thank you as well. The Sunday Review, this cover story about My Body, My Choice, about abortion, about Roe v. Wade, and it's also the cover story of the Times Magazine. This piece, I never thought about ending my pregnancy. Both, I mean, incredibly important stories. These are also incredibly emotional stories for people. So we'll see what's to come after a decision comes down and how states respond to that, certainly. We have just a few minutes left, Clyde. We want to be somewhat respectful, not too respectful, but somewhat respectful of your time. Okay. What is your choice? Where do you go in terms of looking at sections? We looked at book review. Do you look at business, styles? We have the T magazine as well, arts and leisure with Sondheim.
I read them all, but I must confess that the first thing I do with the paper any day, unless I'm really working hard, is the crossword puzzle.
The crossword puzzle on Sundays as well?
Including Sundays. I usually finish it most days. I'm pretty good at it. I did Sunday's puzzle yesterday, and then I start reading the paper. I have a bit more time on my hands. I work from home, and so I can read the paper leisurely. I read it pretty thoroughly, actually. Usually, I haven't had a time this morning yet to read it thoroughly, but I will a bit later. And then I usually start with the front page and move back. During the baseball season, I focus on sports section more. I've found my interest in football and basketball and hockey to have waned in recent years. So I don't follow those sports as much as I once did. Baseball remains my passion.
And mine as well. I never, casual fan of football, maybe, but certainly baseball. And you're from the Bronx originally. I'm from Hastings-on-Hudson, New York. I like to say 20 minutes from Yankee Stadium. Not as close as where you were born, but that's the center of my world. And every time we would drive somewhere down the Major Deegan in New York, I'd always point off to the left to Yankee Stadium. It was just nice to know it was there. And when I lived in Seattle for almost 15 years, always made it a point to see when the Yankees came to play the Mariners. Went out there
Right.
to watch those games. So
Well,
that's
I hope those were good seasons. I mean, I grew up in the New York of the 1950s, where the Yankees being in the World Series every year, and if not the Yankees, then certainly the New York Giants and the Brooklyn Dodgers, was given as almost a birthright. So the notion that New York would not be in the World Series was unthinkable. I don't think my mother was fooled, but in 1956, I faked being ill and to stay home to watch a World Series game. And it turned out to be Don Larson's perfect game against the Brooklyn Dodgers, 2-0. So I don't think my mother bought for a second that I was sick. But it was the best fake sick day anybody had ever taken.
Good choice. Good choice. Certainly, I remember.
I lucked out.
My earliest memories are of the Yankees in the World Series in '77 and '78, right. With Ron Guidry and Reggie Jackson. I played second base in Little League and styled myself after Willie Randolph with the shovel throw to short every time.
Well, I'm a little older than you, or a lot older than you.
A little bit.
And so for me, second base would have been Bobby Richardson. But
Bobby Richardson, of course, another great player. I want to let folks know that next week our guest is going to be Kim Todd. Kim Todd is an author. Sri will be back at the helm. She's an award-winning writer and author of 4 nonfiction books about science and history. Her latest book is Sensational: The Hidden History of America's Girl Stunt Reporters. So we will look forward to that show next week. But we certainly want to finish our time with Clyde. What I'd like to do, Clyde, is to make a couple of quick announcements for folks, and then bring you back for a final word. And if you have a pro tip for writers with your years of experience, we certainly would appreciate that. But we'll give you a quick break and make a few quick announcements. The first thing I want to do is thank our team: Paula Kiger, Steve Taylor, Julia Weeks, and Carla Baranakis. We wouldn't be able to put on this show every week without their support, without their help. And in particular, I want to thank Carla Baranakis. Carla puts out the Local Connection newsletter from the Center for Cooperative Media at Montclair State University. Every week, they send out the newsletter. It offers story ideas and pro tips for journalists. Best of all, it's free. You can subscribe at bit.ly/local news tips, bit.ly/local news tips. We want to thank our sponsor again as well. Muckrack does great work, and we appreciate all the support that you've given over the last 2 years. And there's also a social media course that Sri has worked on with them, the fundamentals of social media. And you can enroll at mrac.co/social, mrac.co/social. I mentioned earlier that we have a next week, She's on Call, hosted by Dr. Sujana Chandrasekhar and Dr. Marina Kurian. Will be live at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. That's next Sunday. Their focus will be this week on cardiac health and millennial wellness. So please join us for that show. And during the week, our friend Rose Horowitz will be interviewing Jean Guerrero, who's currently a columnist at the LA Times and author of Hate Monger. The Women to Follow show is going to be on Tuesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Tuesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. You can follow Rose at Rose Horowitz 31 and Jean Guerrero at Jean Guerre, Guerre, for that show. And as I mentioned, of course, next week, Kim Todd will be our guest, and Sri will be back in the chair for next week's show as the host. With that, I want to bring back Clyde Haberman. And before we ask you for your tips, just want to share some of the comments that came in Apollo says, lovely show. Thanks for the community. And I'm going back to binge watch Henry Cavill in Witcher, but he certainly appreciates everything. Ron Thomas says, refers to our production team as the A-team. Thank you, Ron. Jonathan Borstein, great and interesting show. I love the programs with senior reporters and their tales of the old days of the paper and their big stories. Thank you. So thank you, Clyde. Patricia Freudenberg, thanks again, the entire production team. And Clyde, great interview. Awesome as usual. Jamie Shum, thanks for a wonderful show today. Emily Silverman, such a rich way to start Sunday. Again, we do this every Sunday at 8:30 a.m. Eastern Time on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, and our Digimentors website. Therese had a baseball question. Did you see the 1954 Willie Mays catch? Did you happen to catch that game?
Only on video afterwards. In fact, sure. I looked at it. I watched it again while I was watching this last World Series, and I had some reason to go back to look at it. It still remains an extraordinary catch. And not just a catch, but he then immediately whipped around and threw the ball back into the infield. So there are probably 5 humans on the planet who could do that.
Now, I've seen the replay, and you see the catch, the over-the-shoulder catch, the spin, the throw. Was the throw on target?
Yes.
That's yes. Good. I've never seen the clip go all the way.
No, well, they didn't have that kind of camera work back then.
Right.
But it was, it's quite amazing. No, I was a little young. I wasn't fully following baseball then.
54.
54.
Ellen Austin, a great show as usual. And Rahavian says, I haven't watched one of these shows in quite some time. I'm glad he tuned in today. Thank you for the blood, sweat, toil, and tears in putting today's program together. Please stay safe, healthy, and strong. We're not out of the woods yet. We certainly agree with that sentiment. We're all being careful. Blessings to all during this holiday season. And Therese, thank you, Clyde, for sharing so many wonderful behind-the-scenes aspects of your incredible career. So with that, we would like to ask if you have any final thoughts, any tips for journalists that you could offer us.
Well, I mean, clarity is what we're supposed to bring. So yeah, focusing on exactly what are the most important elements of a story are always going to be paramount. And I guess I'm always reminded of a guy named Ed White, who I met in Seoul, South Korea. He was retiring then as the AP, Associated Press's bureau chief there, and I happened to be in Korea for his retirement party. And he came up to me and clapped a fatherly hand on my shoulder and said, son, I'm going to leave you one bit of advice to succeed in this business. And he said, never do your expense account when you're in a good mood. His basic point being that you're in a good mood when you write out your expenses. You tend to err on the company's favor. So always be a little bit angry. Okay, I'm joking a bit, and he was joking a bit, but there is a certain truth there. But in terms of writing, again, I don't have any. Look, some people are gifted and can write. We looked at Dan Barry's story. Dan clearly was born. When Dan was born, an angel touched him and said, you're going to be one of the best writers the New York Times has ever had. Others are less so. But in general, if you can focus, I taught a course on New York City at Hunter College, an honors course for 8 years. And in terms of the writing, I would always tell the students, just think, what are the most important elements? And that's particularly crucial in a news story. And it doesn't all just flow automatically from there, but it flows heavily from there. It's a little harder to do than you might think, and different people will focus on different aspects most of the time. But clarity of thought is the first ingredient in clarity of writing.
Thank you very much, Clyde. That was Clyde Haberman, former New York Times columnist and reporter, and Yankee fan. I think that should be up there with your accolades. But it truly was, as I've mentioned, truly was an honor and a pleasure to interview you today. As many people have said, they read your byline for years. We had.
Did they read the stories too, not just the byline?
No, just the byline. I mean, I stopped. Okay. I never went further because it was enough. It was enough to know you were there. No,
fair enough.
I'm kidding. No, really. But in all sincerity, thank you, and I appreciate the time that you took with us today. Want to also, Fernando said greetings from Los Angeles. May have joined late. So again, if anyone joined halfway through the conversation, as soon as we end the broadcast, you'll be able to watch it from the beginning on the same links on Facebook, on Twitter, on LinkedIn, on YouTube, on our Digimentors website. On Facebook, it might just take a minute or two to reset, but you'll be able to watch it from the very beginning. I certainly encourage you to do so. A lot of gems. We spent the first while after our announcements between 8:40 and 8:45 and almost 9:30 talking with Clyde about his career, about his highlights, talking about his family, what it was like to bring them on, to have them be a foreign correspondent and have them travel to where he is, talking about his time writing the NYC column, and much, much more. So thank you very much for joining us. And Rose is quoting you, quality of thought is the prime ingredient of good writing. That's as good a way to sum up this show as anything else. So with that, thank you very much. We went a little bit longer today, but thank you for staying. And we'll look forward to having you join us next week.
Okay. Thank you very much, Neil.
Bye-bye.